Oh, hey, come on. Hey, let's go in and talk about pocket knives. So most of my viewers know by now that I enjoy experimenting around with different ideas and new techniques. I mean, if I'm in this to have fun, then I want to keep learning new things as I go. I have no aversion to using synthetic materials, but I still prefer natural materials for knife handles, especially from sustainable, renewable resources. Being an Eagle Scout, I believe in being responsible with our environment. So for this job today, which is putting new handles on a Moormaker 3208 Horseman's Trapper, I tried several new things. The finished product did not turn out at all the way I had envisioned, but in some ways it's even better. Best of all, I have a new option for handle materials now. Like many natural handle materials, this one is derived from animal sources. We are used to horn and bone handles that come from cattle, antler from deer, and even ancient ivory from woolly mammoths. But this mystery animal that I sourced from today is a local critter, and it's much smaller than the others that I've named. It makes for some really nice looking knife handles, yet I've not seen anyone else use this to rehandle knives before now. It is officially known as the Dasypus novemcinctus, which I believe is Latin for tactical assault possum, and it's just commonly called an armadillo. Now, before anyone gets upset, we did not kill this armadillo in order to obtain its shell. No, we killed it for being a lawn-destroying little pest, an invasive species that's been upsetting our local ecology. The armadillo shell is a bit larger than I expected, so I cut off a small corner and studied it. The color of the shell is incredibly ugly, dull, boring, brownish gray, and I thought I would begin by dyeing it blue. Now, I made my dye from magic markers soaked in denatured alcohol. That part actually works surprisingly well. I put this in an enclosed pot to prevent the alcohol from evaporating. The shell had been harvested a couple of years ago and is just as hard as bone. Yet the piece is far too curved to fit onto a knife, so after letting it soak for a couple of hours, I pressed it between two boards and clamped it tight, letting it dry for a week. Perfect. Now it's ready to go on this knife. I begin by removing the one remaining handle and removing the pins. As I've mentioned before, I do not try to reuse old pins. It's just not worth the effort. Now I study the dyed armadillo shell and prepare to cut it to fit. I decide to orient the pieces with the edge of the scales facing toward the back of the knife. Somehow, to me, it just looks better that way. One of the big concerns that I'd had going into this was how to treat the edges of the armadillo shell. I had imagined that I would have to use a black leather dye on it, then something to seal those edges, but luckily that was not the case. You'll see when we finish. After marking the lines and cutting it, I sand to get a good straight edge on one end. Then I measure for the total length of that piece. The length is just close enough that I sand the other end to fit rather than cutting it again. I do this for both sides of the knife. Then, to make sure that I don't get them mixed up, I mark the inside edge with an M for the mark side handle and a P for the pile side handle. I mixed some blue paint with the glue again. In this case it turned out to be a mistake, but not too bad of one. I'll show you why near the end of the video. After letting the glue cure completely, I began contouring the handles. I apologize for blocking much of this shot, but what I'm doing is using an 80 grit belt and sanding the handle material down close, but not quite to those liners. Now to drill for the handle pins and the center pin. Here is where I made another rookie mistake. When replacing handles on a knife that's not been taken apart, I should have put one handle in place, then drill the holes through from the other side. Then you install the second handle and drill it through from the other side. I knew that, I've done it before, I just wasn't thinking. So as it is, I have to drill these holes by carefully peeking around the edge of the material and visually lining up my drill bit from the outside. Basically, I'm doing this blind. This doesn't matter as much on the handle pins because you can put new handle pins pretty much anywhere that you want, but the center pin hole has to be exact. Luckily, I got it. Next, I chamfer all these holes so that the pins will hold. Now, at this point in the project, I was beginning to get very disappointed. As I drilled and sanded, the outer layer of many of the scales began chipping off, leaving white patches. It appears that there is this outer layer that's very brittle that just crumbles, and that's where most of the dye was. I had considered just peeling the handles off and starting all over with something different, but I carried on, and I'm glad I did. I decided at this point that I could dye the handles again after they were on the knife. Now my finishing grind on the knife is pretty much standard. I use a 400 grit belt and match up the edge of the handles with its liners and springs. I'll tell you, the armadillo shell is tough material. The flesh side of the shell is like a very hard leather. The outside of it, though, is made of these interlocking scales that look to be like fingernail material, with short bristly hairs growing up between the scales. It's almost as hard as bone, and it even smells similar to bone when you're sanding it. You may note that my workbench is not only beginning to be coated with powdered shell, but these tiny blue flakes from the outside layer of the shell that's chipping off. The handles do not require much in the way of hafting. They're almost the same thickness as the bolsters. I only have to smooth it a little bit there at the transition. But this completely removes my blue layer on the ends, leaving mostly white patterned surface. As I sand and smooth the handles, most of all that brownish gray outer layer with the blue dye flakes off, and I'm left with increasingly nice looking white and brown patterned scales. Right now, my dismay at losing the blue dye is disappearing, and I'm wishing that I'd not even tried to dye it at all. Now, the blue paint that I mix with that glue, it leaves a dark stripe wherever the glue is showing. So on my next knife, I'll probably use white paint. I also choose to round the bolsters just a bit more. I don't like the well-defined edges of these bolsters as they come from the factory. They tend to wear holes in my pockets. Now I carry this angle all the way around the edge of the handles. Now I'm only taking a very little bit off, so it shouldn't have the problem of removing too much material the way I feared with the acrylic last week. I also sand across the face of the handles to smooth the handle pins and try to remove those little hair bristles from the handle. This removes the rest of my blue-dyed outer layer, revealing the rest of the beauty beneath. I did not remove the hairs, unfortunately, so later, off camera, I used the cigarette lighter to remove them. That worked quickly enough that it didn't discolor the shell from the flame. There's not much to the polishing step. I just bring a quick shine to the bolsters and the handles. And here it is, out in the sunlight, finished. There are still a few blue splotches where the dye penetrated that brittle outer layer, but to me it only lends a little character to the knife. When I do another, I don't plan on using dye at all. The handles feel much like jigged bone in the hand. It provides a good solid grip, does not feel soft or spongy, and has no noticeable smell. Overall, I'm very happy with this project. You can expect to see more armadillo-handled pocket knives coming out of my shop in the future. I appreciate all of you watching. May God bless you.